Chad, is your dog gonna lick itself the entire meeting or
I'm hoping not. I'm
okay.
hoping not, but I noticed that's what he's been doing. That's Joey. He's been licking most of the day. Joe.
But I mean, isn't really what we do a lot to do with self-awareness? So it just seems like it really is a message about us just touching on ourselves and as far as like our souls so that we can extract that.
Hey,
That's right.
veterinarian here. So I'm going to say make sure he's on a good flea prevention.
Oh, could it be fleas?
Yeah, usually when they lick on top the hips like that, there's more of a histamine release. And so it's usually a flea allergy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, awesome. So we have a vet in the house. So sweet. Welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. So I know that there's a lot of newer folks here today. So this is At-Home Songwriting. This is a monthly meetup that I started a few years ago. My name is Chad Shank. I am a songwriting instructor, songwriter. I teach lyric writing for Berklee College of Music online. And then I write my own music and release my own songs online and stuff too. I'm sort of a forever student of songwriting, and I love sharing the things that I've learned. And it's super fun to get together with other writers and meet with people from all over. So as you can tell, as we were chatting this morning, we've got people from all over the globe. So we've got Collins here from Africa. We've got people here from the UK. We have Hans, you're in India, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so we're covering the globe here, which is awesome. Um, but today our topic is going to be about writing bridges, and we're also going to talk about rewriting. So I think rewriting is something that we hear a lot about, where you'll hear people say, well, songwriting is all in the rewriting. And I think rewriting for me, I don't know if it's the right word for what people mean when they say that. I think what it really means is editing. Because for me, rewriting sounds like you're sort of throwing things out and you're sort of starting over and you're redoing it. I think it's more of an editing process. So we'll talk about what that looks like and some of the things that you can watch out for as you are writing your songs. So one of the things, this is just if you feel like it, go for it. No, no obligation. But if you find some value in the workshop, I do take tips. It's buymeacoffee.com/at-home songwriting. And I will paste it in the chat too, but totally up to you. Tips are always helpful, but yeah, it's totally up to you. So what are we going to cover today? Well, first we're going to review what verses and choruses do in songs. If you've joined us for the last couple of months, we talked about verses. That workshop is on the YouTube channel now at athomesongwriting.com. The choruses workshop is in the online community at athomesongwritingcourses.com as well. So we're going to review what those do, but then we're going to talk about the role of a bridge, and we're going to talk a lot about contrast. We're also going to listen to a few songs to see how bridges take us somewhere new. And again, we're going to talk about the process of rewriting. So I encourage you to put questions in the chat. I'll try to, acknowledge and get to those as much as I can. Also, you can use the reaction function and raise your hand, and I'll call on you to ask questions and have discussion as well. But let's jump in here and talk about what these workshops can do. So I want you to focus on getting a little bit better every day and focus on being the best you and writing the best songs that you can, because everything else has been done. So I hope that you leave inspired. I hope that you will continue to develop your own style and process. And be sure to practice using some of the ideas and the tools after the workshop, because you won't get the full impact if you just watch and then you don't put anything into action, or if you don't apply what we've learned. So reviewing the song sections, your verses, their job is to set up the situation. Chuck says, write a perfect song in 100 days. There you go. Might be longer than that for you, Chuck. So for the verses, your verse is there to set up the situation. It's where you set the scene. It's where you give some concrete information that you can sort of then have the listener understand why they're listening to the song. It establishes your who, when, and where, so the listener can determine if they relate to it or not. And then your chorus is the main emotional center of the song. It's the why we tell you everything else. It's the why and really the thesis statement of the entire song. It's the what is the song about? Here's my main message. It's the main topic. It's the core and the hook of what the song is. So now today we're talking about the bridge. And the bridge, I want you to think of it as a literal bridge, because a bridge is there to take us somewhere new. And it can help expand and summarize the ideas in the song. So why would you want to be taken somewhere new within the song? By the time you get to a bridge, most of the time you've already heard 2 verses and 2 choruses. So in the concept of songwriting, sometimes you'll hear the concept of the rule of 2. Again, there's no rules in songwriting, but it's just a catchy way to say this. But a lot of times, if you've done something twice, don't do it again until you do something different. So if you've had a verse and a chorus and a verse and a chorus, you don't want your listener to get bored. So the job of the bridge then is to give us something new and to take us somewhere new and give us contrast. So let's talk about how then we can use them in our own writing. So a bridge is a section that contrasts with verses and chorus. Sometimes the bridge is called a B section. A lot of times you'll hear like A, B, A. That's kind of like verse, refrain, bridge, verse, refrain. So it's sometimes called a B section. B also stands for bridge. Takes the song somewhere new, as we mentioned. Sometimes in the grand scheme of your song, the bridge can answer, where do we go from here? What comes next? And you should try to contrast as much as possible and in as many ways as possible when you get to your bridge. You want your bridge to have a different identity than the rest of the song. So sometimes a bridge can also act like another verse in the fact that it will advance the story, but it does it in a way that it sounds different than the verse and the chorus. And you'll see I repeat it again, the bridge takes us somewhere new. That's the whole concept of a bridge, is you want it to be different. So you can still use it to give new information and to summarize information, but it shouldn't sound like the other verses. Bridges, as I mentioned, can have an opportunity to summarize. They can highlight the main idea of the song, but again, it's different than a chorus as well. So it's not a verse, it's not a chorus. So verses are developmental, choruses are central to your idea, and then your bridge can be where everything sort of comes together and summarizes what your main point of your song is. Now, you don't always need a bridge. So some songs don't have bridges in the aspect where there's new words or there's a new section. Some of your bridge alternatives, you will hear songs that have instrument solos. They might have dance breaks. Sometimes one thing you'll see in a lot of modern music is they will repeat the pre-chorus. So it becomes what they call like a pre-bridge, where it's like a pre-chorus, but it's more like a bridge because the production is different or the effects are different. You could also do a drop chorus, which means that a lot of the instrumentation drops out and it's the chorus sung or performed in a different way. You can repeat a verse in a new way, like with new chords, new rhythms, and you can also do short musical turnarounds. So I see that Tony has a question. He says, Chad, I wonder what you think of these producers who just copy and paste the same 8-bar loop throughout the entire track and then just remove elements from different verses. Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally effective. I do that in some of my songs as well. Where your contrast then has to come from is in the lyrical structure and also the melodic structure, because what's not changing is the groove or the harmony. So where your contrast then comes from is in the lyrics and the melody. But yeah, that's definitely an approach for sure. No, definitely don't frown upon it at all. As long as the other things sound new and fresh, it totally works. So, in summary of writing bridges, you want to have lyrical contrast. So, a lot of times you will have a different number of lines. You can have a different rhythm of lines. You can have a different length of lines. You can have a different rhyme scheme. You can have different rhyme types. Melodic contrast, you can have different pitch range. You can have different rhythms. You can have different places where you're starting in the melody, different chords, different harmony. You can have the groove contrast, and you can also have the production contrast as well. Dana says, can you expand on verse material in the bridge? Like when you skirt around an idea in the verse and then say it outright, matter of fact, exactly how you feel in the bridge. Oh, can you expand verse material in the bridge? I see what you're saying. Yes. So you can use it sort of like a third verse, right? But the idea would be that it would be still contrasting from all of the other aspects, right? So the content may be continuing the story, but all these other things would be contrasted. So we want to take your listener to somewhere new. It can sometimes be a climax of the song. You can use it to build tension or bring release. Sometimes bridges really build up, and then the tension is released in that last chorus. Sometimes the chorus before the bridge builds up the tension, and then the bridge is kind of like, oh, we have a break. Your bridge can a lot of times be shorter than other sections. And again, the bridge is not always needed. So that's kind of what a bridge is all about, right? So a lot of what we talk about has, a lot of the setup within your song is in the verses and your chorus, where the bridge, I hear a lot of people say they struggle with a bridge, but I actually love writing bridges because you don't have to have it match anything. It can be completely free of the rest of the song, and it works as a bridge. Jeanette says, would you consider bridges a resolve? It could. I mean, you could build up tension in your chorus before it and then resolve in the bridge, but you also could build tension in the bridge to resolve in the chorus. So it can go either way. But what I wanted to do now is to take these concepts and listen to them in other songs, because I think the concepts of contrast and hearing how the bridge is different will stand out when you listen to actual commercial and professional songs. So Lauren says a bridge is a good chance to add novel chords. Yeah, bridge is a great place to use chords that you haven't used anywhere else in your song. Anthony says that the bridge sounds completely different from the rest of the song. How do you keep it sounding as though it belongs? So a lot of times that just happens naturally through the instrumentation and the way that it's played. Even though the chords may be completely different, eventually our minds connect it together. So it's sometimes you can go too far with contrast and it can start to sound like a completely different song. But a lot of times you have a lot of room to play, and it really depends on what your taste is, right? So it becomes what is your preference and what is your personal taste. there's some writers that like to go way far out with the contrast on their bridge, and it still works for their style. So I don't think there's a right or wrong rule there. So the first song I wanted to, oh, Chuck has his hand raised. Got a question, Chuck?
Yeah, just real quick. I think it's hard to put a blanket answer on some of these questions because lyrically, it needs to tie somehow to the story you're telling. Whereas if you just do an instrumental bridge, you really do have the freedom to go almost anywhere. But when you're combining a melodic or an instrumental break with lyrics, the lyrics do have to tie somehow to that song. They can't be completely, different and obtuse. I mean, they need to have some kind of connection, right?
Oh, for sure. Lyrically, I think Tony was talking a lot of like chords and like the musical part of it, but for a lyrical perspective, yeah, it's still connected through the same story. Unless you want a total song that, confuses your listener, if that's the goal, then you can say whatever you want.
Right.
Jeanette says we'll figure it out when we cross that bridge. Ba-doom, she's here all week, folks. So the first song I wanted to play for you is a song. Victor says, let Joey out. Oh, what are you doing, Joe? He's fine. So the first song I wanted to play for you is by Stevie Wonder, and it's a song called Creepin'. And this song is a verse refrain song where you'll hear that the hook is actually in the verses, and you hear a verse refrain, and then you will hear a bridge. So I want you to pay attention to how the bridge contrasts to the verse and refrain. And Lauren says the bridge has to resolve to the ear in a satisfying way when the next verse resumes. Not necessarily, Lauren, because you can build a lot of tension that you don't need to resolve. You don't have to resolve unless your content is saying to resolve. But resolving after a bridge sometimes stops you the momentum of your song. So I don't think that's correct. But listen to this song by Stevie and see how he used the concept of bridge. Perspective. It's an interesting structure. Victor, I see that you said were there borrow chords in there, or did he just modulate or reach for the fourth? I don't have that ear like some people do to know exactly what's happening. I'd have to put it into something and see what the chords are, but it definitely sounds modal to me. But what are your thoughts from a bridge perspective, from a contrast perspective? What did you notice on this one? Any thoughts? Everybody's shy today.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I already said this in chat, but it's like he's like having this moment of self-reflection of like, I think of you, but then it changes. Well, I wonder if you think of me, and it creates this cool contrast, because we're kind of like not getting bored, but kind of like, all right, we get it. You're deep in thought, but then it becomes about the other person. So I think that's a really, effective way to kind of keep the listener engaged by shifting that perspective there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because the beach images, I don't know if even that has anything to do with the song, but it sort of colors while you're watching. But no, exactly what you're talking about, Dana, for sure. Stu, how about you?
Musically, can you hear me, by the way?
Yep, loud and clear.
Musically, I was listening musically as opposed to lyrically, and I heard a key change. I also heard the vocals get much brighter and seem to soar as well, go to a different register, and kept on moving up, which was in contrast to the verse vocals, which kind of were on a downward trend, mostly repetitive and downward, whereas the bridge vocals moved up, repeated, moved up again, and then came to a kind of minory section where it seemed to lead back into the the key of the verse and go back into a more slightly melancholy tone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what you were kind of touching on, Dana, too, where you were saying that the content was actually matching what it was doing from the content was even changing perspective when the music changed perspective. And I think that's what David said in the chat too, melodic change, change of focus, for sure. Victor, what are your thoughts?
For me, he didn't change the time signature at all, but when he got to the bridge, the pacing seemed to change a little bit somehow. Just in the way probably in the way he was phrasing it, but the shift into the new key or whatever he was doing there, and the way he changed the lyric structure, the rhythm of the lyrics. I think the underlying beat kept going, but it felt more, I don't know, dreamy or in a new space.
Absolutely, for sure. Is it Psy or C?
Excuse me, it's Sai.
Psy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit confused by the song because I didn't really know what the bridge, if I was listening to the bridge, or what you would classify as the bridge, or if that third or fourth verse that was different to the rest. For me, that was the biggest contrast in the song, not what ostensibly was the bridge, because he tweaks the verse a little bit at that point, and he kind of shifts the dynamic of the song more than the bridge is like. If it is a bridge, it's like, do you have the fantasy about me that I have about you? Okay, I get that. But the one where he alters the verse had more impact on me in terms of resolving the song. So I probably have completely misunderstood it. So I apologize
okay.
if I have.
No, I think what I consider the bridge in this is where when it goes up and it talks about like when I sleep at night, I think is part of the lyric. So it changes the feel. I think that's what you're hearing because it goes verse, refrain, and then there's a bridge. And then he actually goes to like a solo and then the bridge again. And then he goes back to another verse after that. It's an interesting structure for sure. Thanks, Jeanette.
Yeah, so I noticed when you went to the bridge, it took me on a different journey. Like, obviously, the pitch was different, the tempo, but he did it so subtly, which is really interesting. And then what Dana said earlier, it's about you, now it's about me. It was just like totally subtle, but it just took you in a different area. Now it's like the perfect bridge, like a perfect example.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeanette. So any other thoughts before we move on to the next song? David said he's not used to hearing a bridge repeated in a song. Yeah, I think you'll hear that more, David, when it is a verse refrain song. You'll a lot of times hear verse refrain, bridge, verse refrain, and then a lot of times they'll do the bridge again because in a lot of these songs, the bridge almost feels like a chorus, but it's not having the same function as a chorus because it's not really where the hook is living, right? It's more of a bridge structure. But yeah, good observation for sure. So the next song that I wanted to play for you is performed by India Ari, who's a really good singer and songwriter. This song is called Steady Love. So let's listen to see how they managed to work in a bridge in this one. People reacting when she did the bridge was where everybody sort of freaked out. So Colin says, was that 3 verses in a bridge? Yeah, so there was another verse after the bridge, actually. Let's go back here and see. Somebody said, how does she do that without breathing? Practice. Jeanette says, slow, steady sway until you get to the bridge, and the different is what she really wants, and we'll do in detail. Yeah, so the whole groove is steady the whole time, right? Like it's kind of this driving, like it's almost like a little shuffle feel kind of thing going on. But then when you get to the bridge, David says like great use of crescendo. Suzanne says great ramp up of rhythm and groove, higher melody to really bring the bridge to the climax. What a song, what a voice, what vocals. Yeah, it's a super cool song. India has a ton of really great songs. She's a great singer. But I think that is a good example too, where the bridge didn't necessarily resolve at the end, right? She took us up to that note, and then all of a sudden it dropped us back into the verse. So it built up tension, and then the verse like brought us back down. But Dana, you have other thoughts?
I don't know how to raise my hand in Zoom. I'm new here, but I really loved the rhythmic change. So it was just like 1, 2, 3, 4 in the verse and the chorus, and then it was like triple it in the bridge, and that was some really nice contrast that I noticed.
Yep. And that's the key, is contrast, because that bridge is taking us somewhere completely new, and it sounded like it went more minor to me, like, or more in like a blues scale when we got to the bridge. Because she had some more sort of blues notes and some of those notes in there that really made it really cool. Any other thoughts? Cool. So let's move on to the next song that I have for you all. So this one is a song by Troye Sivan, who is a pop singer-songwriter. He's from Australia. This song is called My, and let's listen to what they're doing within the structure of this song. Tony says, is formant shifting in vocals required these days? They do it a lot in some genres, for sure. So let's go back here. So people are saying it built nice tension. Slower pace of the bridge makes you pay attention to the switch up. Yep. So it's the beat drops out. There's contrast there. Dana says 1-note melodic theme. Dana also said short bridge. And then Han says bridge has a drop chorus vibe to it. Yeah, it's kind of a drop bridge. Melanie says to her the bridge was more of a pre-chorus. Yeah, it was a short type of a bridge. Jeanette says tempo and pitch, short. Stu says drops rhythm, minor shift, totally different in melody. Very brief bridge, it was refreshing. Yeah, so it gives us that little break from what we've heard before. So then when it comes back to that chorus, it feels familiar again. So it kind of pulled some of the momentum out, but then it brought the momentum back in the chorus for sure, which is totally effective and something that a lot of you can do within your writing as well. Anything else on that one? And then the last song I wanted to listen to is by Taylor Swift. And this was from her Midnights album. This song is called Lavender Haze. And let's see what Taylor does. So what are your thoughts on that one? Could you tell where the bridge was? Jeanette says the bridge is more direct in the vocals. I saw Dana, I saw you bopping when it got to the bridge.
Taylor Swift is very boppable. It was cool that she repeated it because not everybody repeats their bridges. So that was like a really intentional choice, I think, to really accent what she was saying.
Yeah. And she sort of intermixed like parts of the chorus with the bridge. Like it wasn't a full on complete repetition, which I think, Victor, you had said a reprise. I don't know if that's what the definition of a reprise would be, but it could be. Stu says it changes to pumping 4 on the floor rhythm, shorter lines, different, quicker rhyme scheme. Absolutely. So again, it's all about contrast when you're making your bridges. So sometimes I hear newer songwriters writing songs and their bridge sounds too much like the other sections, and it doesn't give you that same the same experience or the same taking you somewhere else as if you focus on contrast. So focus on lyrical contrast, focus on melodic contrast, focus on harmonic, groove contrast, and all of that can help your bridges stand out. So any questions on bridges before we move into talking about rewriting this morning? Awesome. So let's talk about rewriting of songs. So we've talked about writing verses, we've talked about writing choruses, we've talked about writing bridges. What are some of the things that you do with final sort of rewriting? And as I mentioned at the start of this, I like to think of the word rewriting as really meaning editing, because what you're really doing is you're refining and you're trying to make it communicate things the way that you want your song to be. And sometimes that happens at the end of your process, but I fully believe that you can edit while you're working, and that can be just as effective too. So I don't want you to feel like you start the song and you have to finish it before you start reworking it. You can do it at any point that works for you and that makes sense. Because sometimes in the process of editing, you may realize that your hook was all wrong the whole time. So you might have to go back and change a lot of things. So I wanted to talk about just some ways that I look at this. So we already said I would look at it as refining and editing before you finally release your song to the public, whatever that means, whether you're performing it, whether you're releasing it online. If something is working though, don't feel like you always have to rewrite it. Like I've met people that they think just because it came out first, that means you have to, for some reason, change it. You don't have to rewrite everything. The key is to train yourself to spot when things are not working or if they're bugging you, and then you can adjust things. But be careful not to over rewrite or edit, because sometimes you can edit something to death and you can take all the real sort of magic out of it. So if you feel like you're getting frustrated, you don't know where to go with something, put it aside, let it go for a while and sort of get it out of your mind. And then you can come back to it, or you can just leave it hidden forever. So it really comes down to, do you feel like going back and working on it? But I will tell you, I see a lot of newer songwriters that beat themselves up over songs that they really should put more work into writing more songs, because the more songs that you write, you will start to learn techniques and things that you can use to go back to working on that song that you wanted to work on before. So I see some people that write 1 or 2 songs a year just because they labor so hard over these songs. And I don't think that's necessarily the best way to learn. And for me, that's not the best way to grow. The more songs you write and the more you focus on trying to get better, that helps you write better songs. So common things to look for as you are rewriting or editing. One thing to watch for is, are you doing too much telling and not enough showing? So what do we mean by showing and telling? Well, the 2 types of lyric lines that you have are showing and telling. Showing means that it's concrete, it's sense-based, it's what's happening outside of the characters. So it's things that you can experience through your physical senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, movement. It's facts. Telling is emotion. If you have too much just saying or talking about emotion, that actually doesn't communicate the emotion to your listener the way that a mix of imagery and then summarizing it with emotion does. So make sure that you don't have too much telling. Also, one thing to watch out for is, are all your verses saying the exact same thing, just in different words? Are you actually advancing the story? I see a lot of songwriters that say the exact same thing, just with different words in their verses. So make sure that you are advancing your story. Also, we talked a lot about contrast today. If you don't have enough contrast between your song sections, that's something to look out for. Also, look out for overuse of perfect rhyme. Perfect rhyme means the vowel sound and the consonant are exactly the same. It's a really stable type of rhyme that doesn't always work in every song, and it can sometimes outshine what you're actually saying. And also related to this is, make sure that your language is conversational and relatable, and make sure that you're not forcing rhymes just because words rhyme. You want to make sure that the meaning of what you're saying is more important than just getting a word to rhyme, because your listener will spot those times where you force a rhyme, and it will take them out of the spell of the song. Also, something to look out for in your songwriting, if your melodies lack a motif. And what are we talking about, a motif? Well, a motif is sort of a recognizable melodic phrase. So it's a phrase that is easy to sing, it's repeated, and it has its sort of own melodic identity. If your melodies are lacking motif, your listener, it'll be harder for them to follow along, and they won't experience the song as they do with a lot of professional songs. Also, make sure that your verse melodies are very close, if not exact, to each other. Verses should act as verses. So if you have one melody in one verse, that melody should really be the same in the second verse, so your listener understands where they are in the song. If your melodies are too different, you can confuse the listener, and again, it makes them think. The second you make your listener think, they're not feeling the song, and we don't want them to think it, we want them to feel it. Another thing to watch out for is relying too much on your chorus to save the song. I remember doing this when I first started writing songs. Verses were like an afterthought to me. I'm like, I have a kick-ass chorus. The verses, nobody remembers the verse anyway. Like, the chorus just needs to hold up the song. But if you rely too much on the chorus, there can be, like, you're not building up to the chorus correctly in the verse. So make sure you're not relying too much on the chorus. David has a question. He says, can you have too much showing and not enough telling? Yes, you can. You can go too far the other way too, and then it feels very heavy and it lacks sort of that emotion. So a lot of times you try to balance it with a couple of showing lines and then a couple of telling lines, or maybe 3 showing lines and then a telling line. Make sure you're kind of mixing both. Melanie says motifs come easier when have the melody first and then adding lyrics. Absolutely. Yep. So coming up with melody first is a great way to make sure that your sections match each other, for sure. And they can be much more catchy. Also, make sure that you don't have any point of view or tense issues. Sometimes I see in writing where some lines are present tense, some lines are past tense, some are looking forward. And then sometimes sections will start off as talking to an imaginary you, or what we would consider second person direct address. And then it shifts to like a third person or a first person. So the point of view issues is something to watch out for, because that can also confuse your listener. Also, if you're trying to say too much in your song, that's something to watch out for too. Sometimes we try to say and overcomplicate our ideas. Your song should be about one concept, one main theme, one idea, because it's better to go deep than it is to go wide within a song. So if you're trying to say too much, watch out for that. And also watch out for a lack of a concise rhyme scheme. Rhyme schemes can control flow, they can control pace, they can control starting and stopping for your listener. So if you don't have a concise rhyme scheme that they can sense, that can sometimes throw off the listener as well. Tony says he recently used some AI software to do some gain staging and it made a mess of it, but I highlighted how a different song can sound when some of the instruments stand out more than intended. So you might not need to rewrite a section, you might need to just get the balancing right. That's more of a production thing, but yes. But it's sort of the same concept with the showing versus telling sort of concept as well. So other questions to ask yourself or to ask your song while you are editing or while you're rewriting, does the first verse set up who, when, and where? Can you actually see in your first verse where you're establishing who's singing, who are they singing to, when is this happening, where is it happening, and sort of what is going on? If you can't spot those things within your first verse, you might not have enough information for your listener, because subconsciously, the listener needs to understand what's happening enough to where they can subconsciously decide, do I care about this song or not? And the more vague that you write, the less universal your song becomes. You also want to ask yourself, is my point of view consistent? We already talked about, is the tense consistent? Is the tense driving the story? Do your sections, like your verses and your chorus, have contrasting rhyme schemes? One really great tool to make sure your verses don't sound too much like your choruses is to have different rhyme schemes in each of those sections. Do you use different types of rhymes? You know, are you using perfect rhyme? Are you using family rhyme? Are you using additive and subtractive rhyme? Are you using assonance rhyme, consonance rhyme? Try to vary the types of rhyme that you're using. Do the lyrics sound conversational, like the singer would actually say it? You know, because if your lyrics sound too written or poetic, they don't become as believable because it doesn't sound like the singer would actually say something like that. So does it sound like someone would just speak it? And one way to sort of look at that is read your lyrics out loud as if an actor was performing them. Do they make sense? Does it fit with kind of what you're trying to communicate? So Stu says additive and subtractive rhyme. So additive and subtractive means you are either adding or taking away a consonant sound after your vowel. So an example would be show and boat. So show to boat is additive because you're adding the T sound, and going from like boat to grow would be subtractive because you're dropping the T sound from the word. Or another example would be like town and lounge. That would be an additive rhyme because you're adding a sound. Also, does your melody build energy as the song progresses? You know, are the rhythms changing? Are you keeping the listener feeling like things are moving forward? Sometimes if you listen back to your songs, there will be places where sort of the gas runs out, right? It sounds like the song just kind of stops and hangs. You want to try to avoid that unless you want that effect because that's what you're trying to say, right? But a lot of times you want to make sure that the energy keeps going. Also look at, does your chorus state the why you're telling people this, all of this information? Is the chorus the point, the main theme, the emotional center of your song? That's definitely something to pay attention to. Also, do your verses have the same melody as each other? We talked about matching verses. That's an important thing. Do your choruses have the same melody and lyrics as your other choruses? Choruses are not a place to give your listener more information. So if every chorus is completely lyrically different, then that's probably not a chorus. The choruses are usually the most repeated part of the song, and it's the part where you want the most people to sing along to. So you can have a few little changes, maybe lyrically, but changing a lot of lyrics and a lot of melody, you're probably not writing a chorus at that point. Hansi says, I've always felt contradicted about conversational lyrics versus showing language. Do you use as much showing language in our day-to-day conversations? Most showing sounds poetic, which I feel is opposite. It depends on when we tell a story, right, Hansi? We're still kind of setting a theme. We're still setting a scene, I should say. You know, if you say, So I was at work the other day, right? At work is a showing line. There's no emotion to it. Someone could be at work, right? So you still start by talking like that. Like, I was at work the other day, sitting in my cube, and all of a sudden, then you could go into the telling line, right? So we do speak conversationally in that perspective. Or you can use sort of the technique of, if you're explaining it as if you're remembering something. So I remember when the sunset was casting shadows on the beach, and I remember you saying, you know, blah, blah, blah. You're using showing language to sort of start that topic. Tony says, is it okay to change the timing of the melody slightly between the verses if the pitch stays the same? So what do you mean by timing? Like the phrasing a little bit? You can get away with a few extra syllables here and there, but for the most part, the motif and kind of the general feel should be the same, Tony. The number of notes to add syllables. Yeah, I mean, most of the time you're probably adding unstressed syllables, not a whole lot of stress syllables in there, but it's a good idea to have your verses as close as possible, for sure. Be sure to read your lyrics out loud. You know, do they make sense? Can you feel contrast between the sections when you just read them? A lot of times I see tons of songs that are A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B throughout the entire song, almost the exact same structure. Like, if your song feels exactly the same from start to finish, you don't have enough contrast. So you want to be able to feel contrast even when you just read the lyric. Also, is your title obvious? Like, when you listen to the song, do you leave knowing what the title is? Because the title is how your listener is going to find your song if they hear it before they know the title. So definitely try to make the title as obvious as possible. Also, does the music support the lyrics in a way that you want them to? So is the music giving the emotion that the lyrics are trying to communicate? You know, and some people say, well, I want to write a happy song that sounds with sad music, right? It's like, okay, you can do that, but that can sometimes come across as communicating irony or sometimes sarcasm. So you want to make sure that the prosody between what you're saying and how you're saying it is communicating the way that you want it to. So there's no rules on that, but just know that if you play with sort of the norms, it can sometimes have a backfire effect. Also, does the song keep your interest? Like, do you listen to it and do you stay interested through the whole thing? And a good way to do this is play it for somebody. And if you cringe at any parts, that's a good place to think about taking a look at. Also, take a look at your verbs. Are your verbs as interesting as they can be? You know, a lot of times when people think about writing very dramatic or with imagery, they instantly think of adjectives. But what's stronger than an adjective is a verb, because it's actually an action word that will tell you how something moves. So go through your songs and look at the verbs and ask yourself, could I replace them with more interesting verbs? Now, you want to make sure that you don't go too overboard on using the thesaurus, because sometimes you'll pull words out that nobody uses anymore and it won't make any sense and it'll make your song sound dumb. But you want to like do this within reason. Also, do you have any filler lines? Like, are there any lines that just kind of are just there because that's like you just put it there because you needed something? I just put that in because I needed a rhyme. That's not a good reason. That's a filler line. Does your song sound cliche? Is it predictable? Like, if someone's listening to it, could they almost tell you what the next rhyme was going to be without even hearing it? That's usually not a good thing. right? You also want to have a pleasant sense of familiarity in your chord progression and your harmonic rhythm. Having too complicated of chord progressions and harmonic rhythm will take your listener's focus off of what you're saying. So the reason why, and Taylor Swift gets criticized for this, but the reason why Taylor uses simple chord progressions is because the chord progression is not meant to be the focus of the song. She wants you to listen to the lyrics. And if you're not thinking of the chords, you can focus more on the content of the song. We already talked about showing and telling. One of the things that's really interesting too is to play a song for people and pay attention to how they respond, both verbally, but pay attention to their body language and what they're not saying, because it can show you if the energy of the song is working or if it's not. So that's sort of what I think about with rewriting. What are some of the things that you picked up on all of this stuff today that you might use in your writing, or do you have any other rewriting tips that work for you? Anything you can share with the group? Sai.
Yeah, the overriding kind of thought that I had, particularly in the second section about rewriting, is one of the things I struggle with when I write on my own is really hearing it with what I call an innocent ear. In other words, hearing it as others might hear it. And it's so bad sometimes that I need a good 3 years to go back to a particular song before, or an instrument, I write instrumentals, before I can actually hear it, how someone else might hear it. And at that point, there's a kind of moment of truth like, oh, that doesn't really work, or that works really well. But I don't know how to compress that interval, or I don't know how to get enough space from my own writing sometimes to be able to make the sort of judgments that you're laying out for us in this presentation.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a way to necessarily speed that up. I think it takes time, but I do think if you can take your music to other like song review groups and actually get people's feedback, you will start to pick up on things that they're hearing, and it will sort of give you little cues on like, oh, now I know what people are listening to, and you can sort of learn where what you're hearing and what they're hearing either matches or doesn't match. I think that's one of the best ways to do it, because a lot of times when you play something for somebody, like they will pick up on things that you never even considered, right? Like the things that you're losing sleep over, they just don't even notice it. And then they'll bring up something else and you're like, oh yeah, I should look at that. So I think getting feedback helps you tune in your own sort of radar on that. And I think, sometimes it's good to compare your work to people that you admire, but sometimes it can be devastating too, because you feel like you never get there.
Mhm.
But sometimes listening to like a certain genre that you're trying to emulate and really trying to pick out what does that have that mine doesn't is sometimes a good way to learn too. But yeah, I would say feedback and studying that for sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jeanette.
No, I just have a tip for, you said earlier, what's your name? Sai, about space and all that, and it took you 3 years. Like I was really shy about sharing my music to certain people, but Chad's right about like how do people react by their body language, but also with technology today and how everyone's on their phone, it's their attention span. If you can get that song to grab their attention and their body language, that says a lot. And then you could tell from that vibration too, like that's just my tip.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's a good tip. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome, Jeanette. Stu.
Can I mention an opportunity that I run for people to play their songs?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I run a meetup group which has a monthly song share where songwriters are invited just to come and play their songs through Zoom, and it's every second Wednesday of the month at 7:30 p.m. UK time. I'll post a link if that's okay.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's not commercial. It's just a sort of help each other to help each other kind of thing.
Dory in the chat says she takes her songs that are in progress to the same 3 feedback songwriting groups, and she takes notes at all 3. And she says if the same comment keeps appearing, then it's generally her cue to change some things. I think that's a really healthy way to look at feedback, Dory, because feedback is opinion, right? And there's no right or wrong to it. And sometimes we can drive ourselves crazy if every time someone makes a comment, we rush back to rewrite our song. But if multiple people are saying, I don't understand your bridge, that means maybe there is something there. But you have to remember that we all have our own taste, and getting feedback sometimes can be hard to distinguish between taste and is there actually an issue. David.
Yeah, when you said about reading the lyrics back to yourself, I've got a program called Revoicer, which I can get it to read back to me, and it makes a difference when you put the punctuation into it as well. I find that really useful. And there's lots of other programs where the computer can read it back to you. I find it easier for it to read it to you, and then you can listen.
That's an awesome idea, because then you're hearing it outside of your own sort of thought process. That's really cool. That's cool. Chuck, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, just my experience with feedback is it takes a while of attending different groups, getting different people's opinions to really find the people who understand what you're doing with your songs. You know, if somebody's never heard any of your songs and they're just giving you this, well, you should do this and you should, well, they probably don't even understand your style. It's okay to point out something that's a glaring mistake, sure. But it's important to find and surround yourself when it comes to feedback with people who understand what you're doing as a songwriter and are familiar with your songs. So it takes a little while to find people you trust who you know are giving you sound advice. But they're out there, you know, they are out there. But work hard. Don't just take advice from anyone. And whoever said that, you know, when you hear the same comment several times about a particular song, sure, that's a great time to really look at, you know, that particular issue with your song. Absolutely.
One thing that I think is really interesting too is if you have someone that you know that could actually sing your song for you, so you could actually hear it sung back. Sometimes that opens your eyes to like, is it really working or is it not? Because sometimes when you're singing your own song, you don't necessarily know it. But yeah, Chuck is completely right. You have to understand who you're getting feedback from. Like if someone was writing musical theater, right? That feedback would be different than for someone who's writing for country artists. So you do have to understand what the song is for, and yeah, singing other people's songs. Dana is a singer and a vocal coach and vocal producer in Nashville. So she rocks if you need that service. Victor.
Yeah, I thought Chuck expressed it very well. I recently submitted a song in progress to a songwriting group, and what you said, Chad, absolutely. There's a problem in my first and second verses, and it was right in my blind spot. I couldn't see what it was. And the members of the group all came up with different reasons for why it was wrong. And that didn't help too much, but 2 or 3 days later, I figured out, oh, I just averaged everything together, and there it was. I could see it, and I can't believe how better the revision was. It was basically it was a one song, one idea problem. And I did have one song and one idea, but I hadn't integrated the various aspects of it. So people were hearing the different aspects and saying, oh, take that out, that doesn't belong. It all belonged, but I hadn't really integrated them together, and I was just so surprised how easy it was on the rewrite.
Yeah, and one of the more interesting ways to use AI, I know that somebody said they use AI, but you can actually ask ChatGPT to give you feedback on your lyrics and ask if there's any places that they can be improved, and then put your lyrics in there, and then it will give you advice. It's surprisingly good advice. So that's just another perspective where you could ask the robots about it too. And you can ask it to take on the persona of other writers. Like, I've done it where I say, pretend like you're Jason Isbell and give me feedback on these lyrics. And it will literally, like, as much as the AI knows Jason Isbell, it understands what his writing style is like, and it will give you feedback on your writing. So it's pretty wild to do that. But again, that's just one perspective that isn't even from a real person, but sometimes it'll give you some really cool ideas. And I don't like asking it to actually write things because you said it in there, Tony, the copyright. So anything that is created by AI cannot be copywritten. So if you're writing your songs and you're using ChatGPT to write your lyrics, you can't copyright it. It's not yours. It's not anybody's. So you want to, but it can be kind of a co-writing tool. I use ChatGPT sometimes to, if I'm doing like metaphor writing exercises, I'll be like, give me 10 words related to some topic, and then it will spit out 10 words. And then I'll be like, give me 10 verbs that are related to another topic. And then I'll combine those words together to see what interesting metaphors I can come up with. But asking it to do the work for you, that doesn't help you learn. But if you think of it more as like a feedback, or more of like as a tool or like a dictionary kind of thought process, I think it is useful. Tony says he's reading Steal Like an Artist. Yes, Austin Kleon, that's a great book. Stu says Chad's rewriting checklists are good for pre-writing too. Sometimes he finds I can't just change something once it's settled. All I can do is avoid the problem in the first place. Yes, that's how I operate, Stu. I am not a go back and fix things person. I want to write the next song better kind of a person. So yeah, I totally agree with that too. Sai, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw a little bit extra back into this discussion because it's a fascinating area, I think, and about getting feedback from other people. One of the things that I've learned, because I run a small creative writing group, and a kind of unwritten rule that we have is that if you give feedback and say, sort of not negative feedback, but you say, I'm not sure if this is really working. The rule that we have is you only say that if you have a suggestion as to why it's not working and how it could be improved. And what that tends to do is focus people's minds, because sometimes you hear something and you think, I'm not really sure, but you can't actually put your finger on it. And that is valid feedback. But if you can actually crystallize it as the listener to somebody else's piece in your own mind, what you think might be an improvement. The risk, of course, with that is you're now meddling with their creative process. And you can get a negative response from that. So it can be a double-edged sword.
No, that's great. That's great thoughts too. That made me think too, like in feedback sessions, sometimes it's good to just be an observer of other people's work, because sometimes the feedback that other people get will ring true to your own work, right? Like you'll hear a comment on something and you'll be like, oh, I do that all the time. Or like, but yeah, that's awesome, Sai, for sure. Dana says tons of publishers turned away J.K. Rowling for the Harry Potter series. Totally. I mean, within the creative spaces, we're dealing with everybody's opinions, right? There's no right or wrong. It's just, is it doing what you want it to do? And are the right people resonating with it? Like, is there an audience for what you're doing? And that doesn't mean that you're writing for an audience, but even if your audience is like you and 5 other people that like your music, then write that if that makes you happy. If you're writing to try to be commercial and make money, then you have to play the sort of the game of, well, you need to be different, but yet you have to sound exactly the same as everybody else, which is Nashville. Right, Dana? Dr. B says, so in our opinion, do the AI engines follow the same instructions and directions that I recommend? Surprisingly, yes, they do, because they have taken in everything that's online. So like you can ask it, like, what would Pat Pattison say about these lyrics? And it will shockingly give you very like Pat Pattison-esque feedback on lyrics, right? So when it's giving you feedback, it is really good. To Dana's point, though, when it's writing lyrics itself, they're very cheesy, and it's almost always perfect rhyme, and it just isn't good. Yeah, so anything else you all want to talk about today before we start to wrap things up? Hansi says he uses Pat's family rhymes chart and then hit it with a prompt. Cool.
What's the difference between showing versus telling?
Yeah, so showing is using concrete sense-based details to show something rather than say it, right? Like you can show that someone is sad by describing, you know, they had bags under their eyes, they had tears running down their cheeks, you know, they hadn't showered in a few days. Like you're showing a situation more than you're telling. So showing is descriptive, concrete language, whereas telling is just saying she was sad. You're just telling it rather than showing it. So the difference is telling is more emotional, internal language. So it's feelings, things that happen inside your character, whereas showing is more outside of the character that is sense-based. So it's something you can see, taste, touch, smell, hear, all of those things.
Got
That-
it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
That makes
welcome.
sense.
Awesome. Well, everybody, this was super fun. The next thing that we have coming up is June 15th. We are going to do a 1-day songwriting challenge where we're going to meet on Saturday. I'm going to give you a prompt and some criteria. And then we're going to spend 1 day writing a song. And then on Sunday morning, we are going to listen to the songs that everybody wrote from Saturday. So it's going to be, I think, our fastest songwriting challenge yet, but I think it will be, it'll be fun. Oh, it can be done, Tony. Writing a song a day, you can do that for sure. Chuckles, what do you got?
You know, I'm not gonna rewrite within, 3 days of writing a song. So this is a problem with this 1-day thing, with this rewriting workshop today. You're teaching one thing and then you're forcing another. I can't take it.
Okay, Grandpa. Melanie says, "Can I just sing live with a guitar?" Yeah, as long as we can hear you. Okay. Otherwise, people can record on their phone and upload the file as well. But I'll be giving you a place where you can upload a recording on that day, because we'll put it in the community, and then I'll make a playlist. Tony has Solaria on standby. Yes, the synth V voice. But yeah, I think it'll be fun. And it doesn't have to be, obviously, 1 day, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's a good challenge for yourself to, sometimes you have to set the critic aside and not go too deep into writer's block in those situations.
There'll be a chance to wing it, right, Chad?
Wing it. Yep. Absolutely. Someday we'll do like a 2-hour challenge where we meet and then we'll take 2 hours and then we'll come back in 2 hours. How about that?
That would be awesome.
Go for it.
Cool. Well, I will see everybody coming up on June 15th. And everybody, it was great to meet the new folks. Hopefully you'll come back and join us. And if you want to catch other past workshops, they are on the YouTube channel at athomesongwriting.com or in the community at athomesongwritingcourses.com as well. And if you feel like tipping, I put the link in the chat as well. So thank you all very much for hanging out, and I hope you have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Chad.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jess.
everybody.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.
You too.